G'day viewers. So this is just a quick little book review on two different books on Scottish fencing that have been released recently. The first one is called Scottish Fencing, presented by Jared Kirby with contributions from Paul MacDonald and Ben Miller. And what it is a collection of five manuals, so let's call them 5 texts, all of which have something to do with 18th century Scottish swordsmanship. So the first one is a transcription of a handwritten manuscript. It's called The Examination and Vindication of the Highlanders' Manner of Attacking and Fighting the Enemy in a Day of Action. And it's a handwritten, fairly long little rant, I guess you'd say, from a chap who was a veteran of the Scots Greys who fought the Highlanders at Sheriffmuir. And he goes on at length to say, more or less, these guys are actually pretty scary. Historically, it's an interesting read. There's nothing in it that really tells us anything about the Highlanders' manner of fighting that we didn't know already from other sources. But if you're into clan-era Highland history and stuff, it's a really interesting little read. So that one's good. The second book is a manual. It's really the only proper fencing manual in the collection, by a chap named John Ferdinand, who was a sort of local Edinburgh fencing instructor. It's called The Swordsman, and it's a relatively short treatise. It covers small sword, broadsword, and spadroon. Now, what it is really a bit of a crib on Lonergan, okay? So this came out in 1778, Lonergan came out in 1771, and Ferdinand obviously had a copy of Lonergan and decided to fix a couple of issues with Lonergan. The first one is that Lonergan is really, really, really long. Okay, it goes on for a long time. And the second issue with Lonergan is that when he gives you the lessons, like the paired drills, he usually doesn't tell you what the other half of the pair of you is supposed to be doing. He only gives you one half of the drill. So Ferdinand, while I'm not sure there's anything in terms of technique that is different, there may be, and it would take considerable study to wade through it to figure out whether or not he's changed any actual techniques. But the way he presents the drills is definitely better. Okay, it's vastly more concise than Lonergan for a start, and he's quite clear to give you both halves of the drill. So he says A does this, B does that, then A does something else. And so that's really, really useful. So it's only a very short little manual, but nonetheless, pretty interesting and cool. Third part of the book is a dictionary on fencing by a chap named Harry Ferguson, which is all the terms of the art of small sword. Now, it's not all the terms, but it's most of them, it's a lot of them. And there's some interesting little snippets in there that I found to be pretty useful. So again, there are plenty of these little dictionaries around, and so there's nothing in here that's really going to change the way we all do small sword. But again, an interesting little text. The fourth one is by Sholto Douglas Sawley. And what this is essentially his crib on Le Marchant's cavalry exercise. So he's taken the official cavalry exercise and he's just added a few bits of extra explanatory detail here and there, just because he felt probably it wasn't quite complete enough for his taste. So if you're really into mounted combat of the late 18th century, you might find that interesting. Other than that, it's not really all that exciting. And the fifth book is really a historical essay on a chap named Donald McAlpine. Now, he taught broadsword in America. As far as historical records of his techniques go, that is it, that page. So you can't really expand that into a system. So it's really just a short little biographical essay on it. So overall, is the book worth it? Well, if, like me, you're a bit of a completist and you do want to have a copy of everything and read everything you possibly can about Scottish swordsmanship, then sure, yeah, it's got some really interesting information in there. If you're not a completist, if you're just working your way through Angelo's 10 lessons or something, you're probably not going to get a great deal out of it. So I think it's a well put together little book, but how interested you are will determine on whether or not it's worth the money. Our second book is Scorners of Death, which was written by these four gentlemen. As part of my full disclaimer, I know and am friends with three of these people, so I'm going to be diplomatic. So the book is really an exploration of medieval Highland warfare and combat. It contains a fairly long historical essay to start with, talking about the Highland warfare in the Middle Ages, the Gallaglasses, what they wore, what the weapons were like. Lots of interesting historical quotes and snippets and references and things like that. All really excellently researched, as I would expect. So that's all really pretty good. And throughout the book, you get more little bits of historical information thrown in here and there where it's relevant. We're talking about specific weapons. And then we have a series of technique chapters, first of all on the single sword, then on sword and shield, then a little bit on bows and slings and darts and that kind of thing. Then we have the Highland two-handed sword, not a claymore, and then a bit at the back on two-handed axes, and even a little bit on mounted combat, and then some sort of appendixes with other bits of useful historical information. So despite the fact that it's a fairly slim volume, it's trying to be really comprehensive. Now, as far as the technique section goes, what can I say? What's good about it, okay? First of all, none of the techniques are bad, okay? They're all perfectly reasonable techniques in and of themselves. They're all based on historical sources. Some of them are a bit broadswordy, some of them are a bit silveresque, some of them look Fiore-ish. So they're all real techniques and they all work just fine. There's also an attempt to produce some sort of commonality, okay, where you're getting basically the same 10 plays, single sword, sword and shield, two-handed sword and axe. And we know that these things were taught as integrated systems and there was expected to be some commonality across the weapons. So all that is in its favour. My reservations, I guess, are twofold. First of all, there's no overarching theory. There's no set of principles to hang the system on. There's no set of principles that you can use to extrapolate techniques from. And without a set of principles, of course, all you're left with is sort of a bunch of tricks. My other issue is that there's not nearly enough exploration of either the design characteristics of the weapons themselves or the context of use in terms of how that relates to the technique. So, for example, the Highland single-handed sword, okay, so we know that the quillins slope down rather than being straight. And that suggests to me that they were doing moulinets and wristy blows with it, because the straight crossguard can get in the way, you bend them down, and that allows you to do these sorts of things. The pommels often had long spikes sticking out the end, which suggests that they were fond of pommeling each other in the face. And while we do get to do a quill and reap and a pommel in the face, there's no real justification as to why we think that might have been a common technique with that particular weapon. The sword and shield section, one guy's got a buckler, one guy's got a targe, and it's obviously drawn from Page's plays with a broadsword and targe. But, of course, without the basket hilt, things have to change. And while, yeah, okay, we know that Highlanders did have bucklers, and yeah, by the end of the Gallaglas era, they were using targes. The real classic combination from the period was actually the sword and heater shield. And that's mentioned, but I would have liked to have seen more of an exploration of the heater shield, which of course acts in a very different way to either a buckler or a targe. And of course they are different to each other. I don't think you can just extrapolate the same technique across different weapons without taking more into account how the different weapons work. And I think this is most clearly seen in the two-handed sword section. There's nothing wrong with the techniques as shown, but none of them really give you a sense on how to use a two-handed sword. The design characteristics of the Highland one suggests that it was probably used like a little montante. And again, we're told this is mentioned, and we're given even some instructions on how to do some montante-like flourishes. But the techniques that are photographed don't really give you a sense of how the weapon is likely to be used. Likewise, with the axes, a lot more you can do with an axe. You can do all the hand slidey things and head swapping and quarterstaffy stuff, which is super cool. And so in the desire to keep things simple and have the same 10 lessons from weapon to weapon, I think a lot has been missed in there. Opportunities have been missed to more fully explore how the weapons were used, you know. So, is it worth it? For the historical information alone, yes, absolutely, it's great. Really, really, really interesting. If you're coming from a medievalish background and you're looking at Highland stuff, you might pick up a few extra little techniques drawn from later sources that you can incorporate. If you're working with a broadsword and you want to go back and look at the earlier weapons, this is a way that you can use what you already know to play with the earlier weapons, but that doesn't mean that any of it is correct. So not the definitive book on medieval Highland swordsmanship, but definitely worth the money for the historical information alone. And that's my review.